Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the ministers, for agreeing to be here for the next 6 hours. We appreciate that. No? No? A little fun to begin with here, guys. You can smile here. So Conservatives agree directionally that, of course, we need national projects built. We need the elimination of interprovincial trade barriers. In fact, over the last 10 years, the old Liberal government was very much against that, we felt. We are glad that the new government appears at least open and directionally. But we do have some concerns, particularly on the ethics, accountability, and transparency side. And I'll start by referencing sections 21, 22, and 23 of the Building Canada Act. When these sections are combined together, what they have the ability to do is give a minister the ability to exempt any national project from any piece of legislation passed since 1867, with the exception of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Given that, and given the fact that the Prime Minister worked for one of the largest constructions and manufacturers of national projects, of infrastructure in Canada and perhaps in the world, in Brookfield, could you please identify to us the screens that we put in place to make sure that we don't have conflicts of interest or other lobbying concerns?
Well, Mr. Chair, perhaps I could, and thank you for the question, Mr. Lawrence. It's a good question. And you're right when you identified the operation of those particular sections. In no discussions that I was in or that I participated in was exempting requirements under the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Act, for example, would be a piece of legislation that obviously you're referring to. As the minister who would be designated as responsible for this act, I can't imagine that in the course of my recommendation to Cabinet, that would be the kind of exemption that we're looking at. But I'm obviously would, in any circumstance, be governed by the advice that we would get from officials from the Privy Council office and the Ethics Commissioner in those circumstances. I get the hypothetical question you're asking, and I've seen you and your colleagues raise these concerns in different fora elsewhere. I just think it feels very hypothetical that we would be approving a national project and look to exempt responsibilities of any member of Parliament or public office holder, member of Cabinet from the ethics obligations. I wouldn't ever do that myself. I wouldn't go to Cabinet with that kind of recommendation, but I take your point.
Thank you, Minister. Well, I would follow the old Ronald Reagan quote of the "I trust but verify," and it is striking that the way that 21, 22, and 23 work together in the Building Canada is literally any legislation can be exempt, including the Conflict of Interest Act, the Lobbying Act, the Income Tax Act, the Criminal Code. And while I certainly want to trust, I would also like to verify. So my question would be, would you be open to an amendment that would restrict that to prevent exemption from the Conflict of Interest Act and other acts?
Again, Mr. Lawrence, thank you for the question. And the Deputy Clerk, because as I say, it is a good question, and I wouldn't want to leave an impression that is inaccurate. And perhaps Chris Fox could add something if, in my explanation, it's not as precise as it should be. There are limits in terms of what acts or what exemptions could be issued. In Part 1, it talks about Acts of Parliament, Fisheries Act, Indian Act, International River Improvements Act, National Capital Act, Navigable Waters Protection Act, Migratory Birds Convention Act. It doesn't speak of some of the ethics obligations, the criminal code.
If I could just...
It speaks, but, and again, because your question is a good one, I don't, hypothetical question, we're going to approve or designate a project and exempt it from the Criminal Code of Canada. Doesn't feel like, I just don't want, doesn't seem like a legitimate line of questioning.
No, and I appreciate that, but the Act actually says in 21 you can add other acts to it, which means you could, in theory, add the criminal code. I'm not saying you would, Minister. I'm saying that the possibility there too exists, and we have seen in the old Liberal government that we've seen some ethical lapses, and so I know, shocking, and so we would be looking for an amendment to make sure, and specifically, like I said, the Prime Minister, of course, worked for one of the largest infrastructure, or ran one of the largest infrastructure companies in the world, and so putting those screens in place, I think, are incredibly important. Would you have any details on how the Prime Minister screens might be put in place to make sure we don't have conflicts of interest?
The Prime Minister has answered the questions, and the Ethics Commissioner's office is able to talk about all the screens that are appropriately in place to ensure that there is, in fact, no conflict of interest or appearance thereof. I'm not sure that any of us are going to speak to those specific ethics provisions, but perhaps Sarah, can you add something?
Yes, just on the controls that are in place with relation to 21, 22. So yes, on the recommendation of the designated minister, the GIC could add acts and regulations. That's needs to be done with respect to the purpose of the Act, which is to advance national interest projects, provide environmental protection, respect Indigenous rights. So it needs to be in keeping with the purpose of the Act, first of all. And then the regulations under Section 22 would need to actually be on the recommendation of the minister responsible for each of those acts. So the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, if modifications were being made to the application of the Fisheries Act. So that's another control that's in place.
Thank you.
They're also subject to Statutory Instruments Act regulatory process.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson, and thank you, Mr. Lawrence. 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate it. Thanks you, ministers, for being here. Just to follow up, to conclude on what my colleague Phil Lawrence was asking. So just, is it safe to say that neither of the three ministers here are responsible for the bill, and no accusation towards you in general, but neither of you are aware of or have seen or know about a concrete ethical screen in place for the Prime Minister? Okay, I'll just take that as a no. So let's now. So
these things are properly done by the Ethics Commissioner and the Deputy Clerk.
Responsible for the bill.
Ms. Fox, did you want to respond to that?
I just wanted to
the
state
minister
quite
should
clearly
respond.
that at the Privy Council office, we are working very closely with the Prime Minister's office to manage all of the conflicts that he's declared, and that is operationalized within the communications between the Privy Council office and the Prime Minister's office, and that would be linked to anything, including this bill.
Thank you. So you may be aware, but that it is clear then that the ministers responsible aren't, but so Canadians will trust you on that.